Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Fuse Show. I'm joined today by my guest, Martin Rufo. Martin is an operations leader at CreativeX, and he is ex-Uber, ex-Amazon, a writer in his own right, has lots of great wisdom and experience to share. So we're going to have a fun conversation, no doubt, here today. So thanks for joining us, Martin.
No, thank you, Jim, and thanks for having me on the show and the generous compliments. We'll say writer is maybe a little too generous.
Okay, well, we'll get into that. So, yeah, the piece that I have in front of me, I think, is really useful. So, but we'll get into that. So, tell me, give me an idea in our listeners, an idea of what CreativeX does. And I looked at the site, but I generally love for my guests to explain as if nobody has ever heard of it, what you guys do.
Sure. Not enough people have heard of it, so I'm more than happy to talk to it
Fair
anytime.
enough.
So a little bit about us. So CreativeX is used by mostly Fortune 500 B2C brands. The Unilever, the Pepsi, the Heineken, GSKs of the world, etc. What they've realized is the way they communicate is predominantly through the usage of images and videos. They're producing more visual content than they basically ever have before. And what they realized in the process of creating more and more content for social, for Facebook, for Instagram, for YouTube, etc., they had no way to actually measure, analyze, govern anything they were actually building. And you can imagine when you're working with these companies, there's people all across the world creating content that they really aren't tracking at a global scale.
I
So
see.
what we've done is built technology to manage this, help customers combine their performance data to better understand how creative decisions, the usage of this visual content is actually impacting sales, marketing performance, etc.
Interesting. Wow, I can see how that would be very useful, especially at scale. Yeah.
Yeah, at the end of the day, when we work with a customer like Unilever and they have individual agencies that their head of marketing has never heard of, working in Indonesia or Paraguay, and producing content for their Facebook ads that are reaching millions of people, it impacts so much, and they have no way. They had no way of tracking it, and hopefully, we're helping solve that for many customers today.
That's awesome. So, what is your role in the company?
Sure. So I liken myself to a little bit of a potpourri of
Okay.
teams. So a little bit about myself. I was originally brought on to lead our product operations team. Product operations has everything to do with customer experience and onboarding our specific customers. But as you and many of your guests on the show previously know, there's so many challenges in a Series A early startup that
Yeah.
no one's really thought about. So what I've come in and done is started with the first team, product operations, built up processes, built up frameworks for how to make decisions, and then started to do that for many of our other teams. I came into customer success after that. Uh, in the past 6, 8 months, took on our people operations, everything related to HR, recruiting, strategy and operations. That's everything pricing, analytics, data, and most recently legal, which is not really my forte, but
It's exciting
someone
stuff,
had to
man.
do it's basically everything from except ordering the toilet paper at the office if we ever get back there.
Okay, got it. So I'm curious. I just had a thought. Something that we do at our company is build frameworks for support, customer success, et cetera. What are your thoughts on adoption by the team? So you come in with outside eyes. You think, "Gosh, I could optimize this process, or build this process, or optimize this process." But in order for it to be effective at scale, you need adoption. You need buy-in from the team. Like, what are your tactics to, I guess, just even go about that?
No, absolutely. I think this change management is something that's very underrated as a skill or as a tactic that a company has to go through. Uh, for me, when I come into a new organization and new team, immediately I'm thinking, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem, without ever understanding the why something is the way it is. Why was it set that way? And I think the most important to actually effectively manage change management and implementing a new process or a new framework is getting the input of folks that are currently in the role and understanding why they do the thing they do. If you don't do that, you don't really understand, hey, this is actually some legacy process that our previous technology never solved for. Or, you know what, I've never actually taken a step back to think critically, why am I doing this way? And once they realize that and they learn that for themselves, then you can come in and say, hey, here's this better way of doing it. I've personally been very heavy-handed sometimes in doing that, and that is the time when things are rejected the most. I'm sure you've seen the same.
Yeah. You know, I'm reminded of this Netflix show. I wish I could attribute it properly, but my wife and I were watching it, and it was a social experiment. And there was a waiting room, like at a doctor's office or something, and there were several actors and actresses sort of planted in the room. And every time a tone went off, they would stand up. No explanation. Just it's as if you and I were actors in the room. A tone goes off, you and I stand up. So people start coming in, and they're sitting down and they're looking around. You and I stand up at the tone, and then we sit down, and pretty soon they start doing the same. Mm-hmm. Well, what they did to further this experiment is eventually the people that actually knew what was going on, so like you and I, would leave the room. And at some point, there was a room full of people, and nobody knew why they were standing up at the tone. They just did so. And like my observation has been in some companies, and I think you pointed to this, is that like people do things that they've always done, and they don't know why, and those were instituted by previous generations of staff, and they're nonsensical at this point, but they don't know why they do them. They just keep doing them.
Absolutely. And I think the thing is, if no one comes in to actually think critically, you're going to keep doing those things. So I think that's the importance of bringing in a fresh set of eyes, bringing in folks that are going to challenge you on the way you do things to actually grow a business. I think for us, one of the ways that we've actually incorporated this is in our values themselves at CreativeX. One of the ones that I love, and maybe it's pulled from my experiences at Uber and Amazon as well, is the idea of encouraging constructive dissent.
Okay.
And, you know, in other companies I've been at, dissent has been something that's a little bit divisive, to say the least. But I think the way that we've implemented it here at CreativeX is the idea of pushing back on an idea is actually encouraged. We want people to come in and say, hey, why are you doing this way? Or, hey, this doesn't seem right. Because no one at our company should be above another, and everyone at the end of the day has the company's best interests at heart. And I love how we've implemented that.
That's really great. Yeah, that can be so challenging. One of my previous roles before we founded the company that we work at now, and by the way, my co-founder, David Tran, is a former senior engineer at Uber out of the Bay Area. So he spent several years there. So I thought it was neat to see that you had that experience as well in the past. But anyway, so in my background, I worked in sort of operations leadership and in the acquisition side of a private equity firm. And we would buy multiple SaaS businesses. And I came to realize there's this very unique opportunity when you see the prospectus and go in and evaluate a business, decide whether or not we should acquire it or make an offer on it. You really can see the forest where a lot of the founders can't see the forest for the trees. And that happens, I think, to all of us. And there's this precious time period where you can come in with what I like to call outside eyes and like see those things that are inefficient and find those processes that are archaic, et cetera, and actually make some useful suggestions on how to go about or consider changing those things,
Absolutely. I totally agree. I think anytime you come into a new organization, it is refreshing to have that. Or anytime you bring on a new person as they're going through onboarding, having that perspective is refreshing, even for me who's been at the company for less than a year, or a little bit more than a year. Excuse me.
Okay. What I have to constantly remind myself of is that I value this from the perspective of having done it myself, but I also want to remember to value it in the position I'm in now. So our business is a little over a year old, and I'm slowly becoming unable. I fear that I'm slowly becoming unable to see the forest because I'm so focused on the trees, and I have to constantly check my pride to allow for the dissenting opinions and, check my pride at the door and be like, you know what, maybe this isn't the best, that, this is just the way we started doing it as a startup because we needed to get it done. Maybe there's a better way. So what would you say to that? The idea of the importance of humility in this process?
No, I think it's something that is necessary. The idea of ego, especially as a leader within a startup, is only going to inhibit your growth long term. If you can't admit, hey, this is wrong, this is not the right way of doing things, then why did you bring in all of these smart people? Why did you do all of this work to set time to get differing opinions if you're not going to accept them anyway?
It seems foolish, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I think David might say the same, but it was 2018 Uber, right in the midst of a lot of change, where Ariana Huffington came in and spoke at one of our all hands and said the era of brilliant jerks is over. And it's something that's stuck with me for a long time. 3 years later, 3.5 years later.
Yeah.
It is not enough just to have smart people anymore. You need people that want to work with each other, who want to accept the ideas of another person. And it's the only way that egoless way of mindset is the way forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something to be said about building a culture where where a dissenting opinion is encouraged and even expected. And that's something that we're really focusing on at Xfusion, our primary business is. And you know what, and a whole nother part of this conversation is the cultural challenges. So we have a significant portion of our team from Kenya and from the Philippines and some from Mexico as well, and the United States. And we've had to learn that culturally there are some challenges in, I don't know how they would refer to it, sort of talking up back to authority or like standing up to authority. It's like it's been a work in progress for a very long period of time to get our leadership team based in these other countries to speak up, and they do now, and it's beautiful to watch. But it's just like pulling them out of their comfort zone to do so. Is that something you faced in particular at CreativeX or previous orgs, or no?
Oh, absolutely. I think when you're working with people of different backgrounds, even different career and different work-life backgrounds, it is absolutely prevalent. I think the thing that I've noticed most actually is the way that our UK team is very different than the way that our US team operates in terms of how they interact with other people. And certain stereotypes often hold true, where our UK team is very, very polite, absolutely polite, where our US team's a little bit more straightforward. And navigating those cultural differences and backgrounds is something that every organization has to go through. Something that I've actually loved and tried to implement within certain team meetings of my own is the idea of always having a dedicated devil's advocate. Okay. Someone in a meeting to say, I'm going to push back on basically every single idea.
Okay.
And say,
interesting.
Are we sure about that? Or how did we come to that conclusion? And the idea behind that is that just becomes part of every single person's mentality. That becomes part of how they do their day-to-day work, regardless if they're going to be the devil's advocate in that meeting or not. It works to varying degrees, and it definitely takes time. But setting that framework and setting at least the sandbox so that people feel comfortable pushing back was one of the things that I found most valuable.
Okay, let me play the, not to be too cutesy here, but let me play the devil's advocate to your devil's advocate,
please,
idea. So how do you handle? Because I'm thinking, I agree, by the way, but I would say that there are some people that maybe have rather sensitive egos who are offended by that. They've worked hard on this idea, they present it, someone's playing that role, pushing back on the idea, punching holes in it. So how do you go about handling that scenario where you have someone offended because of this pushback?
No, I think that's absolutely fair. And I think that's the value of having one person be the dedicated and everyone knowing who the dedicated person is. So it's the thing about this type of work, and really any type of criticism within a meeting, it should never be personal. It should never be, hey, this is bad because you did a bad
Fair,
job.
okay.
It is, hey, I want to understand how we thought about this. I want to understand how we could do this even better in the future. When you set those parameters and have that dedicated person, people that are presenting an idea will much more quickly incorporate that feedback and not internalize it as a personal attack.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's helpful. All right, let's change gears real quick.
Sure.
So 3 years, according to LinkedIn, 3 years, 1 month at Uber. And then next up is 8-month backpacking sabbatical, Western Europe, Eastern and Southeastern Asia. Tell me about that.
Sure. So the joke about Uber for a lot of people is 1 year at Uber is 3 years anywhere else. So 3 years at Uber is 9 years anywhere else, and that is a very long time. And I've wore a bunch of different hats when during my time there. So I felt I needed a little bit of a break. I needed to reset and understand, hey, what am I looking for next? What are the skills? What are the experiences that I look for as I progress further into my career and further into my personal journey? And the best way to do that for me was to take the time to travel. And luckily enough, it was pre-COVID, thankfully, so I was able to actually have that journey. And for me, it was a time of exploration and just meeting new people, understanding why people do things. I love the idea of anthropology and the understanding of how people and how cultures interact with each other. So I spent 3 months in Europe and then about 5 months in Asia, where I was exploring basically a new city every 4.5 days and meeting people within a city, meeting people and sitting down with them, going to coffee shops and trying to just meet locals to understand. For me, that was an experience of self-learning and just ability to really put myself out there that I hadn't had any time else in my life, and ultimately helped me center around what I was looking for my next step in my career as well.
So what were the greatest lessons then that you took away from that on a personal level?
Sure. So some of the lessons, when it comes down to it, ultimately from a career perspective, I think I spent a lot of time just reading, and a lot of time reading books from founders and from people that have built massive corporations. And I knew that my next step, I didn't want to join another massive company. I knew I didn't want to join another Uber or another Amazon. While I loved the experiences I had there, what I was actually looking for and what I learned on this trip is the idea of building from the ground up excites me more than anything else. And I was able to find that here at CreativeX. I alluded to it a little bit, but I do a little bit of potpourri within our company. It's just a little bit of everything. But when I first applied to the company, it was for just some random marketing role. I said, hey, what you guys are doing here at CreativeX is interesting. Let's just figure out what the best fit for me is. And, when I came into CreativeX and I started meeting the team and met Anastasia, the other learning I had was the team that I joined is so important. The founder and the people that I work with is going to be the most important thing, or one of the most important things, outside of just coming in and building something exciting. We spend, upwards of 50 hours a week talking to these people, so you have to enjoy the time you have there. I think the last learning outside of building and the team is just the idea of the work you put in should feel like the work you put out, or the outcome out. And being able to see that in your career was so important to me personally. And finding a place where I could do that, finding a place where, we didn't even have an applicant tracking system, an ATS software. So being able to do that, instantaneous feedback, or, implementing a process that no one else has ever thought of, was really exciting for me. And I feel like these are the core beliefs that I'm always going to have uh, whether it's at CreativeX or any other journey that I take in the future as well.
That's very interesting. So you felt like you didn't have that at Uber and at Amazon. In other words, what would be the right way to phrase it? Like where you could see the fruits of your labor directly. Is that fair to say?
I think I think yes, especially towards the end of the time at Uber, and definitely my time at Amazon. Don't get me wrong, I love them as places to work, but they're behemoths. By the time
True.
I left Uber, it was 15,000 people. When I first joined, it was a few thousand, and it still felt like you knew basically everyone in the company. Most of the people that I know actually aren't even there anymore. So it's a very different ability to make an impact, and it happens at a micro level, but those macro levels definitely aren't there anymore.
I see.
When you're talking about millions of trips per week in a city.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. It's weird. Like, I guess, kind of segueing to the idea of online work. I I regularly experience, like, everything we do is just right here in this computer screen, and there's no physical manifestation of my work. And I remember a few years ago, I volunteered to mow the yard, like the property at our church. And it, like, there was ball fields, like it was a rather large property, and I used a riding mower to mow it. And, like, I found that so satisfying because I could see the fruit of my labor. I'm like, this looks good, and it's physical, and I can see it. And I just, like, I think most of us, now I get maybe there's some exceptions with creatives where they're producing something, but, like, most of what I do and build, it's non-physical. It's like hard to see. It's not, I don't know. You know what I'm getting at there? Like, getting that sense of accomplishment from the work that you created.
No, absolutely. And, I actually think that's why, especially in this time of COVID, especially in the time of, work from home, we need to put that outlet maybe somewhere else. So I think that basically everyone I know picked up some new skill set, bread baking, cooking, an instrument, a language.
That's another thing. Cooking's a good example.
Exactly. And those are the things where, hey, maybe if you're not seeing on your day to day, you can find that joy. Otherwise, it's no fun living a joyless life. It's no fun not seeing the time that you put in to produce something great.
Yeah. Now, I'm curious, if you could snap your fingers and have it any way you want in terms of your work world, would you prefer an in-office environment at home or some sort of a hybrid model?
Snapping my fingers, I would love a hybrid model.
Okay, and how would that look?
Sure. So I've been doing a lot of thinking about this with our CEO Anastasia and our CFO Mike about what the future of work looks like, and we've done a ton of surveys with the team and tried to understand what is actually the future of work look like for everyone, or what do they want it to look like as well. But speaking to me personally, I've never been the type that has needed to be in an office for the sake of being in an office. And it's the same thing that I've always told to my teams as well. I don't need to see you. The idea of FaceTime is not a thing that I need. The work product and what you actually put out is actively the thing that we think about when it comes to productivity, and the thing that it comes to success here at our company today.
Yeah.
So my ideal is, we only go into the office times when we actually need to, whether or not that's an office that we specifically have or some type of co-working space. Because there are times today where I say, hey, it would be super beneficial if we could just whiteboard this out, because, Zoom whiteboards, not great. InVision does an okay job. Google Meet whiteboards, not great. But I would just love someone to bounce these ideas off of, put all of this to paper. I also recognize that for some of our sales teams, they need the office. They need to bring in our customers. So we need something where, hey, if we have a customer meeting, they can come in, they can meet our tech teams, they can meet their commercial teams, so that they can have that. But for the most part, we've really noticed that productivity has not dropped off. Work satisfaction has actually increased because people don't have the commutes. especially here in New York, where people, you know,
Yeah.
opt to move out a little further, so they're not in a box of an apartment.
Sure. Yeah.
They gain so much more satisfaction out of that. I think those
Yeah.
are the types of things that I think about when thinking about the future of work.
How do you manage the personal side of it? And I know this is independent on the person or dependent on the person, but I love in-person connection, socialization. Now I will say there's a point where I went on a business trip to Vegas a couple weeks ago with a colleague, and this is somebody that I've known personally for years, and I really enjoy his company. But when it came to the actual work we were doing there, I had just gotten so used to, like, you and I have a conversation. When it's done, right? We close the recording software. It's like, it's over. You're not still in my office. So like, if we were in office together, we're having a conversation like, okay, I'm going to start working on this. 5 minutes later, you're like, hey, Jim, what'd you think about this? Or what'd you think about the game last night? Or I was like, well, it was cool, man. I was like, it was good. And like, okay, I'm going to go back to work on this. Like, there's that interruption. And I felt myself conflicted because I love the personal connection. I love the conversations, but I'm like, I'm used to being able to concentrate, on my work, and it just wasn't the same.
No, absolutely. The thing that I think about is I love the water cooler chat. I actually think some of the best ideas that the team has ever produced has come from those types of things, from the casual to informal, or if you're at the office late night having dinner, it's just, hey, what about this? I really truly believe that those ideas and those times are so valuable. But you're putting in something, or you're honing in on something really interesting. It's the idea of flow. The ability to get actually into deep work has been so undervalued in the traditional office setting, where people really aren't able to think critically because they're constantly getting interrupted. It's actually one of the main arguments against the idea of open offices, which every startup ever, or every startup recently, has adopted. But the ideas of cubicles existed because people were able to get to those times and have the space outside of those to get into flow. So it's definitely a conflict. I think the other thing is when you're in a pit with a bunch of other people and you're back to back with your coworkers, there is a certain level of camaraderie and trust that comes from that isn't really developed in this time where everyone is remote, which is why I think actively getting back into the office, maybe 1 or 2 times a week, specifically as necessary, can hopefully rebuild some of that.
Sure.
Especially in a time where we're onboarding so many people that have never met another person at the office.
Yeah. Yeah. And to that point, I would also say that I think there's value in having, like, whatever we call it, company sabbaticals or meetups or whatever. So for a fully remote company to once or twice a year meet up with the entire staff, because there is something like, if you and I meet in person, there's just something that's like different the next time we meet online, because I know the full essence of you more than what I can garner from this, video chat. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's just something different about that.
Yeah, it's I think it's a level of almost accountability is the wrong word, but I'm going to use that for now. But right now, if we were working together, you're just a face on a screen. But if we met in person and we shook hands and we had a coffee together in person, there is a different level of relationship building that is just that videos can't replace just yet. Yeah.
Yeah. It really is hard to capture that or hard to describe that, but I think we all understand it and can feel it,
Right. I think about this right now, where in previous offices I was in, could I just tap someone on the shoulder and interrupt them and just say, hey, give me some thoughts on this, or just call out to them? Could I do the same thing over Slack in a non-intrusive way today, without saying, excuse me, can we just take 5 seconds? Don't non-urgent, blah, blah, blah. I think that level just isn't replaceable just yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So spring of 2018, you wrote an article that I see here on LinkedIn called The Process, Uber, in My Next Chapter. It's a short article, but there's some really good things here. And you talk about the 76ers and specifically this quote from Sam Hinkie. And he says, we talk a lot about process, not outcome, and trying to consistently take all the best information you can and consistently make good decisions. Sometimes they work and sometimes they don't, but you reevaluate them all. And I'm curious what trust the process means to you and what you take out of that quote and just, I guess, the ethos that he's talking about.
Sure. So anyone closely in my network knows that I love basketball. It's why I write these parody type articles. I have another one. It's an MJ return to the workplace after my sabbatical type article.
By the way, did you see that Netflix mini doc series on Michael Jordan?
The Last Dance, phenomenal. So good.
I thought it was great too. Yeah.
So interesting to hear about how people think. But it's exactly that. It's about how people think about things. Why I personally became a 76ers fan. So a coin that was termed in basketball in 2013, 2014 was the idea of trust the process. Before that point, the Philadelphia 76ers were a middling team. They got to the playoffs sometimes. They really didn't do very well outside of one or two instances, basically since the 80s. Sam Hinkie comes in and says, hey, we're going to turn everything on its head. We're going to gut every asset for future assets so we can have the highest potential for success. Using analytics, using the idea of finding diamonds in the rough. For 76ers fans everywhere, it was very divisive. For basketball fans, hated it. The idea of putting out a bad team purposefully for long-term draft picks, inconceivable.
Wasn't well received. Yeah.
Definitely not well received. But for me personally, in terms of trust the process, this has always been something that I have tried to internalize from my working perspective. I have to recognize that I'm going to make many mistakes over the course of my career. I made plenty. I have to recognize that there's going to be setbacks no matter what I do. I can do every single thing right and every single thing in my control and still not get the outcome I want because there's so much outside of my control.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think about this in terms of CreativeX. We could perfectly market, we could build the best product ever, but for some reason it doesn't stick and not have the outcome we want for a specific customer. That doesn't mean we did anything wrong. That doesn't mean the product is bad. It just means we need to take the learning, we need to recycle this, and we need to put forth with more data a better outcome next time, or better process next time, so that we can hopefully get the product we want. There's this idea of Bayesian probability, where you're only doing the best to increase your odds of success, because to actually produce outcome, you need 100% certainty. And in our world, that is never happening, virtually never happening. So for me, trusting the process is doing the best you can every single day, taking the inputs and taking the learnings so that, hopefully you get the outcome you want.
Dude, that is so my theme song. Yeah, I love it. One of the things that has occurred to me, and I talk about this pretty often, is that I feel like generally when we're disappointed, it's because of unmet expectations.
Right.
And that makes me evaluate those, like, well, were they ever realistic to begin with? And I'm curious to hear how far you take this, because I'm not a fan of setting goals generally, because in specific, I guess we don't have to keep it on the context of business, but right now I'm talking about that context. Is like, to your point, there are so many things outside of our control. And maybe you could say micro goals, where it's like you said, like what I preach all the time is like, we need to show up each day, do our very best each day, and do our best to decide what is the next right thing to do, and do that with all of our heart, and also balancing all of our other responsibilities. I mean, I have 5 kids, and like I have a life outside of work, which makes it even more important. It's like, I don't have 12 hours a day to do this. I have to get this done in a window of time. I have to be so diligent in picking what is the highest and best use of my time. Mm-hmm. But like, what would you say to the idea of setting expectations, goals versus just being very focused on the micro level? How do you balance that?
I think it's always constant conflict. Everybody likes success. That's a given. Everyone likes getting the outcome they want.
Right.
And setting general goals and setting your ideal outcome is never a bad thing, in my opinion. Just setting
Okay.
generally how would I love this to play out, how would I like my life to generally play out is really great. Where that gets toxic is where you are constantly obsessing over the idea that if I don't get this specific thing, I don't get this specific outcome, then I myself am a failure. Failure as
I
a
see.
worker, or in your example, failure as a parent, or failure as anything in your world. But the thing is, just like we talked about, there are millions of different things competing with the specific interest and the specific process that we're trying to portray for ourselves and trying to execute for ourselves. That if I think today I have control over 75% of the outcome, in reality, maybe that's actually 10%, and we'll never know.
Yeah, so true. Yeah. Man, that's just it's so fascinating to me. There was a paradigm shifting moment. I was listening to a podcast, and I don't remember who it was, but it was talking about the idea of, venture capital and VCs funding startups and, backing founders. And this idea that, there are multiple occasions where the business is not successful and it fails by all accounts, but then that same VC will back that same founder again on another venture. I'm like, dang, that's a great testimony to the idea that it wasn't the founder, that there are things outside of their control. In fact, the significant majority, I would argue, is outside of their control. I don't know. I guess I hadn't seen it that way, but that was really paradigm shifting for me.
Yeah, I think it's entirely true. There's a book that I've read and I've recommended to basically everyone. It's Hard Thing About Hard Things, and he talks about the .com bubble and the idea that you could have built the perfect product, but if it was 6 months too late, you're doomed. It was specifically under the context of Netscape and how they were the first mover within the internet. But 6 months later, AOL came in, took their basic playbook and did everything over again. And it was no failing on their own. They tried to do everything within their control to build exactly what they wanted. It's just someone did it a little faster, a little bit quicker, and no failure.
Yeah.
It's definitely.
Yeah. I think the same can be applied to, market and market size as well. I read an article recently that Corey Haynes had shared. He's one of my buddies and a really amazing marketer. And the story was written by the founder of Gumroad. Oh, I wish I could remember his name. It's not in front of me right now. But anyway, he was talking about, it was, like a venture-backed startup, and he had billion-dollar aspirations, and it just didn't play out that way. And basically, for those not familiar, they provide, I guess, a platform for creatives to use to charge for their creative products. And they have been really successful in the sense that a lot of creatives use their platform. But what he basically said is we overestimated how large the market was. We were capped because of the size of the market. And I think that's so relevant too. It's like we've been fortunate. It's like our primary business is providing outsourced customer support, customer success to startups. That's what we do. And we started off right at the beginning of COVID. And I left a full-time secure job. My wife is like, you're crazy, what are you doing? And she's been supportive. Like once I jumped out, she's like, okay, I'm in with you. But it was scary, but actually, and this is so weird to talk about because so many people have been so negatively impacted by COVID. But in some industries, my daughter and I were talking last night, DoorDash is one of them, but some industries have just expanded because the market has expanded. So in our world, more and more people went remote. Once they're remote, they're open to the idea of having a conversation about outsourcing because they're just one step closer. So the point is the market just expanded and continues to expand versus in an opposite world, it could have constricted. And then we're like, oh, dang, the market is constricting. There's already all these players, et cetera. So I just think that's an important thing to consider in the startup space.
Oh, absolutely. I think about the idea of Vine, the social media platform from a few years ago. How,
Yeah.
how TikTok is basically a reskinning of it. It's just, Vine couldn't figure out a way to monetize. And it was just a product of the time and how people were interacting with social, and the idea it didn't work at that specific time. I think similarly for CreativeX right now, it is also a weird thing to say, but we work in the world of creatives and the work of advertising as it relates to Facebook and Instagram, etc. And Fortune 500 companies are building more content because people are on their phones at home more than they ever have been.
Sure.
In between a meeting, they're going to pull up Instagram.
Yeah.
And that's just the fact of the world it is right now. The market could, you're right, boom or bust for no fault of their own.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the last topic I want to talk about, Martin, is this idea of playing the long-term game. And you alluded to this a bit in that article. Long-term investments win over short-term gains. I'm curious, it sounds like that you're a believer in that, and I'm curious how you apply that in both your professional and personal life.
Sure. So I think the most recent example of this is related to team decisions. So I told you we have to, I do a bit of everything, but some of my world right now is related to people operations and talent strategy. We've grown significantly as a team over the past year here at CreativeX. We've gone from, I believe it was around 20 to next month we're hitting around 50. So just within a year, adding 100% more people.
Yeah.
The thing about that is we've been meticulous about the next person we bring into the company, because we know right now our teams are feeling a little bit strapped. They're feeling, as our customers have grown, actually there's more and more pressure from each of these. Mm-hmm. But the idea of just adding another person today, just adding someone for the sake of increasing bandwidth, is a short-term gain, not a long-term investment. I think especially in a startup our size and moving from Series A to potentially a Series B in the next few months, the potential of the team today and the team you build today is going to so heavily impact the next team you bring in, so heavily impact the way you make decisions. So even though I might work a little bit longer a specific night or the team might feel, hey, this customer's not getting exactly the attention they need, we recognize that the putting in the time to make sure that we're getting the perfect or as close to the perfect person is way better than just getting someone who is going to fill a seat. And those are the types of things that manifest itself, not just in your career, but in your personal life as well.
So how do you play that out in your career? I mean, it's like, it's a balance between, like, in my past, I feel like I have jumped ship too soon in some cases and have started over. I mean, I have like I've done lots of things in my professional past, including I was a crimes against children detective for 5 years. Like, I've done a lot of things in the business world and outside of. And what's been interesting is, like, the pro of that is I apply the lessons learned in all these different contexts to what I do now. And it's been kind of a rich experience to be able to do that. That said, I've sort of started over a lot of times. So there's the downside as well. And I don't know if you're familiar with the meme. I bring it up on occasion, but like there's this meme where this guy is like digging a tunnel underground with a pick, and he's channeling through, and he gets right to the edge of the diamonds, and he stops and turns around. It's like, you were so close, like there's that tipping point where compounding starts to take effect. It's like, that's my fear, is stopping too soon. But to play devil's advocate with myself, there's also the idea of going the wrong direction for too long, sunk cost fallacy, et cetera. So how do you balance those ideas?
No, I think about the companies that I've left and the potential stock that I've left and how since I've left. It's makes me a little sad sometimes, but
that's fair.
I'm sure many folks can say the same. But I think the thing is, it's exactly what we talked about before. We're making decisions with the best possible information set we have today, so that we can get the outcome we want in the future. as long as you properly dictate what you want, as long as you're aligning what are the values, what are the things that are important to you, and are you getting those from your next experience, from your next anything, that is all you can do as an individual. The rest is up to chance, up to all of these other factors. When you come to peace with that, I think then you could say, at least I'm building the XYZ traits, the experiences and the skills that I wanted, regardless of it got the original outcome had I gone the original path. And the other thing is, you're right, you could have gone down that other path and it could have led you not to diamonds, but a little bit of dirt.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because there are like, I think of my past and I apply it to business. Like there's a lot that doesn't connect, but then I think like for example, the relationship, what's the right word? The experience I had with relationships and the things that I learned being a detective are so deeply applicable. Like those principal issues, the principal factors that carry over from one thing to the next that just help you to be a more connected, I guess just generally a better human being. And that applies in every aspect. And I think like so often I think about like the corollaries of psychology and business, and it's really just people. Like I hear, founders sometimes will say like, oh, it's B2B. It's like, it's like, no, yeah, okay. But like B2B sales, right? Like, no, it's still a human connecting with another human, making a buying decision on a human level. It's just bigger dollar, like larger dollar amounts. That's the only difference. It's still humans interacting with humans.
Right. Would you still be able to, input the value that you are able to now in your current ventures if you didn't have those experiences in the past?
Yeah, no question.
Exactly.
Like, and that's the beauty of it, I guess. It's like I guess that's the positive side of, because I stopped building equity in those careers, but I guess that's not necessarily a bad. It's weird though, man, because like I see those lessons, but at the same time, I'm pretty staunch on wanting to stick with Xfusion for a long period of time, because like it's the type of business that takes a good long while to build the relationships to have the returns. Maybe it's just a matter of season of life too. Like that's a whole other factor as well to consider, is like where are we at in our, like my novelty seeking days are not behind me, but like I just feel more stable in my life and have less of a desire than when I was in my 20s to seek novelty. I don't know. It's just, there's so many factors.
Yeah, I think that's totally true, and especially as a family man such as yourself. I've had mentors though that they reach a stage, especially when their kids are still at home, where that novelty factor is gone, but as soon as they're out of the house, they're back on that. And you're right, it's a seasons of life.
That's a good point.
Thing. So who knows, especially in our world right now, what the future of our startups might look like. It's just about optimizing for what we can today.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's an interesting point. I had this sinking feeling on the way home the other day from the office. Two of my girls are 14 and they're starting high school this fall. Mm-hmm. And it just suddenly hit me. It's like they're going to be out of the house in just a snap of my fingers. I mean, it just goes so fast. I'm like, dang, like I want to optimize for fatherhood right now. Like this window is narrow, and if I get to live to be, normal life expectancy age, 80 years old, let's say, I've got a long season after they leave the house. It's like, why not prioritize? Like, I get that I have to put bread on the table. Like, I get that. Like, there has to be a balance. But I'm just saying, like, it just feels like it's not the season of my life to make business my ultimate priority. But to your point, it's like, dang, I'll be roughly 42, 43 years old when they leave the house. It's like, I could have a long season of focusing on these things, So it's just, I don't know, it's paradigm shifting.
Absolutely. And as long as you're building the skill sets that, might prepare you for those types of things in the future, just like your previous experiences have, it's all gonna be beneficial.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Martin, this has been fun. I want to be mindful of your time. You have just an incredible amount of wisdom to share, and I really appreciate you joining us.
No, Jim, thank you for having me. It was a great chat. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So what's the best way for folks to find you if they want to reach out and say hello?
Sure. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Martin Rufo, but also feel free to drop me a line. It's martin@creativex.com. More than happy to chat with anyone about specifically CreativeX or anything that we talked about, or if you just want to talk
Great.
about basketball, I'm there as well.